So today's presentation is about everything I learned in the past year and everything I learned in the past 8 years doing professional networking. The title of today's presentation is called 100 True Friends, How to Build a Network for Fun and Profit. So feel free to have fun in the presentation. But to get things started, we're talking about one of my favorite studies, probably the most impactful studies of the past century. The Harvard longitudinal study for adult development. It's gone on for over 85 years. It was the single longest we've ever taken. It's its fourth director. It's in its second generation of code. So they sought out to answer one simple question: what is the biggest determining factor of our health and our happiness as we age? They came to a conclusion. It's not fame. It's not fortune. It's not how much you exercise or whether you drink or smoke. It is the quality of our relationship. That was the biggest determining factor. So what do they mean when they talk about quality? They're talking about trust, ultimately. You know, who do you trust to have your back? Whose back do you ultimately have as well? So if this is such great things for our health and our happiness, what gets in the way of us as humans from attaining that? Right? It's ultimately that we are human, right? I think Kalen's razor might say it best. You know, never attributes malice, what can be better ascribed to human fallibility, right? There's only so many hours in the day. We're busy, we're forgetful, we're limited by our brain's capacity to remember. That gets in the way of us developing meaningful relationships. So let me ask you this. Does anybody know how many meaningful relationships any human being can have on average at one point in time?
Less than
5.
A little more.
50.
10. Higher.
In the 12, 24. 50?
Come on, down.
I'm ready to.
Okay, yes, but keep it going. Down. Do you know what the number is called?
Oh, 151. Is that Dunbar's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar was the first scientist to study the amount of relationships we can have at any point in time. So he originally was studying the size of primates' brains and their social circles and extrapolated to humans that 150 number is what we would experience. Since then, he later did dozens upon dozens of social network analysis studies, looking at phone records, emails, holiday cards, and surveys, and came up with that number time and time again. So it's pretty solid of where we're at. So this is the taking the 100 down from friends in gets us to that 150 number. Obviously, there are people who are more asocial, who have much smaller social support systems, whereas there's also people who are hypersocial who might be able to double that average. Like your full-time BDOs who are spending 6+ hours a day purely focused on relationships.
Does that mean I can remember all their names?
Yeah, should. But we'll talk about that some more.
So you're saying the hyper social can have 700 relationships and know who they are and remember them?
Yeah, so according to Dunbar, the cognitive limit of known names is about 3,500 names and known faces around 5,000. So these are actual relationships that we're talking about.
That's obviously cool. Yeah. Where you're.
So like, I know not everyone's comfortable with using the term friends in their professional lives and the people we meet in this room, but understand for this presentation, I'm mostly talking about this band here. So better than acquaintances, maybe less good than some of these inner social circles. You know, I've heard people use alternative terms like buddies, pals, associates, maybe. But from Dunbar's research, no, he doesn't make any delineation between your personal and your professional life. That's an artificial thing we've come up with, right? You don't get 150 at home and then another 150 at work. It's 150 all in. And how you allocate those slots are up to you. But I can tell you about all the famous authors who write about the subject of network, and they all come to a similar conclusion. Not only do they blur that line between personal and professional, they often obliterate it. They often fill all these inner circles as well with people that they've met through work or who have worked with throughout their career. You know, me on a personal level, my 2 closest friends, one, the first time we ever sat down was over a business coffee, and the other I met at a Chamber of Commerce award show. So I just think you just kind of meet people wherever you meet people and kind of see where things go from there, regardless of the context. So I think when we typically talk about professional networking, people often think about acquaintances, maybe racking up as many hundreds, if not thousands of acquaintances as possible. And don't get me wrong, people can be very successful with those strategies. But what I've come to understand, and the thesis of today's presentation, is that your time is most efficiently spent actually focusing on that 100 friends band. Not only by doing that will you automatically end up with hundreds of acquaintances anyway, so you might as well. But going back to the Harvard study, the people who found friendship, not only in the 8 hours a day that they were at home, but the 8 hours a day that they spent at work, they had the greatest sense of belonging. They were the happiest individuals that they ever found to have lived. Because of those things, their cortisol and stress levels are a lot lower than the average person. The result is they had the best health. Not only that, they lived the longest as a result. But I think most importantly, we also see it as the most surefire path to career success and ultimate profitability. So first case in point, quick show of hands. Who here has ever lost a potential job or a client that by every objective measure, you should have one, but they went with somebody that they already knew, they already liked? Basically everyone, right? So look, that is not a bug, that's a feature. That's based on the way we make decisions, right? Study after study has indicated we don't make decisions logically, we make them emotionally and then retroactively justify those decisions with logic. The result is we don't hire based on who's objectively better, we hire who we trust. Now I'm going to pick on my friend Alex Gonzalez for a second. Alex Gonzalez is a private banker with Broadway Bank. Now, could I tell you what separates Alex from all his other competitors? Not a chance, right? Like it's money, it's literally fungible. But I mean, maybe he could sit me down and tell me how his bank is different than the other banks, but would it really matter? You know, according to the science, not at all, right? Because I'm making decisions based on trust. Luckily, I like Alex, I trust Alex, so why wouldn't I prefer him in any possible chance I had? But this gets to the heart of the way we make decisions, right? Some decisions we low trust, right? Maybe a stranger or an acquaintance might be good enough. Maybe you just need an answer, right? Hop on Google, find 3, pick 1, good enough, right? Then there's other decisions, right, that require a great deal of trust. Let's say your son or daughter was falsely accused of a crime and you need a criminal defense attorney. I don't think hopping on Google is going to cut it. You're going to want to know and trust that person, or you're going to get a referral from somebody you already trust that you know is going to get the job done. Speaking of which, he's not the guy for that job. Speaking of which, as your recruiting show, we are in fact looking for a white collar criminal defense attorney. So if you know somebody, you trust to keep your ass out of jail, please introduce them to myself or Lori Canepa so we can get them out to this room. That being said, basically in this way, trust in and of itself is a competitive advantage, right? If you're focused on high trust friendships and all your competitors are just focused on surface level acquaintanceships, when there is a referral opportunity, who do you think it's going to go to? The person that they like and trust most. I'll give a quick shout out to Scott Carley, the Change Energizer, who is a offsite facilitator, team coach, public speaker, and author of the book, Can I Trust You?, which is all about this dynamics of trust in our professional careers. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend checking out this book. So second case in point, how confident are you that that acquaintance you met, call it 6 months ago, still remembers that you even exist? I had this experience that not that long ago where I got a message on my phone. It was a LinkedIn message. And I look at the face, I don't recognize it. I look at the name, nothing comes to mind. Yet next to both of those is a big old 1. So we met somewhere, sometime. Turns out I traced the traffic back. We met 3 weeks prior at an online provisors event. I have no recollection of ever meeting them. But this is how our memory works, right? So Herman Ebbinghaus was the first research scientist to devote time to systematically study our memories. What he sought out to find is the rate of decay of how our memories stick around. So he was testing himself on nonsense syllables and periodically retesting to see if he could remember or not, and that has the rate of decline. Now, he was testing nonsense syllables, but the same logic applies to our intimate relationships. You might imagine that the strongest bonds decay the slowest, whereas the weakest bonds decay the fastest. Case in point, that person you used to date a decade ago, despite best efforts, you probably still remember them. Whereas if you shook someone's hand today that you have only met once, you probably got about 2 weeks to follow up. And if you don't, the likelihood that they remember who you are is probably not that much. So according to this, there's basically two main components, right? There's frequency and then there's quality of our interactions. So in terms of frequency, Ebbinghaus's research is often used to create what I refer to as spaced repetition systems so that you never completely forget the things that are most important to you. Right, we can use CRM devices to periodically remind us to reconnect with the relationships that matter most. Personally, I use a 4, 6, 9 month cadence, right? So if I met somebody for coffee today, 4 months later, I want to reconnect, then every 6 months until a friendship forms, at which point 9 months. But there is a great paradox, right? The closer the relationship, the more durable it is. Yes, the less time to maintain, but more often you like that person more, right? You're finding excuses to want to work with them and interact on a more routine basis. And almost no one ever gets onto that 9 month list. But also, this is a way we can structure our guesting for this year, right? If you want to be more involved in provisors and guest in more in meetings, but you don't have a ton of time. So how can you structure things that you never get forgotten on which groups you go to? Last year, the way I did it is I went to all 7 Austin groups in February, and then space, do it in May before school gets out, before Memorial Day, space with the summer, do it again in the fall. So you're playing with those curves that you're getting. This year I did a little bit differently. Half groups in January, half groups in February, January to April, February to May, yet again, repeat in the fall. Except for the Cedar Park group, I'm waiting for the merger, the new venue, and then I'll talk about. The second half of this equation is quality, right? If you have superficial interactions, it's going to lead to unremarkable relationships. What does encode into memory the best? Well, it's novelty. What's the opposite of novelty? Monotony, right? So look, those Zooms and those coffees, sure, they're plenty fine for that very first interaction when you haven't decided whether you want to invest in a relationship or not. But after that, literally do anything else if you want to be remembered, right? Go to a lunch spot that neither of you have been to. Go get drinks somewhere that neither of you have been to. Go find some common activity, be it hiking or Topgolf, that is way more memorable and interactive than just a simple old coffee. I was talking to the group leader of Austin One, Sean Bukowski. He said they did a troika at the Austin Museum of the Weird. Right? That is a very novel experience that they will remember for many months into the future. But this is also the way we can structure other things with our social events we're doing this year. So if you're trying to figure out what events to go to, always prioritize those socials because it's going to be a more novel experience than a simple provisor event. So the good ones are obviously the provisors plus alcohol events. But the even better ones are the ones where you have an opportunity not just to catch up with the folks you already know, but to develop new memories, an activity like Topgolf or Prop Stroke, which I think we're going to try and get on the calendar later this year. Those are your best memory events to focus on. Okay, now that we've talked about the kind of science behind the way we operate, let's talk about the individual one-on-one interactions that you have with people on a day-to-day basis. So it's going to come down to some critical things like understanding the difference between perspective and perception, right? And the way our perception or our perspectives differ from one another, there can be friction in our relationship. We'll also talk about, how are you spending your time? Are you going door to door, Zoom to Zoom, coffee to coffee, and marketing at folks? Or are you spending your time trying to connect with the people in the room and actually getting to know them on an intimate basis?
You guys got Tom Singer. I went to one of the events that he did. And he talked about, when you go networking, a lot of people try to meet people. It's like, what kind of thing is on the water? It's,
In terms of our perception versus perspective, so the way we perceive is based on a common reality, right? Our ears and eyes, the information we're taking in. but our perspectives are personal. It's the way we interpret that information, the way we show up to the table with whatever mental baggage we might have. Right? When we meet people for the very first time, we're either consciously or subconsciously asking ourselves, who is this person? Do I like this person? Do I trust this person? Does this person affect my career? Do I want to invest in this relationship? When people have very different perspectives, like some people are transactional, right? I asked one person, hey, how's life outside of work? Feels good, and you? All right. Some people hold strict definitions between their personal and their private lives. They don't want to mix the two. Some people aren't here to make friends. They're here to win. There's other people who have very narrow definitions of value to them. They only want to talk to their best referral sources, and literally no one else. I get this reaction all the time. I don't work with distressed businesses. Why would I want to talk to you? Sometimes nicer than that. Other people have capacity constraints. Like life is coming at them. They just don't have any bandwidth to meet new people or to form new relationships. Nothing wrong with that. And then there are people who view networking as a marketing exercise instead of a chance to connect with others. In 1874, there was an election held for the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. They were facing off between William Gladstone and Benjamin Disraeli. A week before the election, each man independently went on a date with one woman, Jeanne Jerome. Jeanne Jerome was a famous woman or accomplished woman in her own right, but she might have been most famously remembered as the mother to Sir Winston Churchill. When she was asked to opine on the experiences with the two men, she said of William Gladstone, well, when I left dinner with him, I thought he was the smartest man in all of England. What a resounding endorsement. What could be possibly better than that? When asked about Disraeli, she said, well, when I left dinner with him, I thought I was the smartest one. I think in professional networking, it's easy to fall into the trap that we think we need to be the former, right? If only I had that perfect elevator intro pitch. If only people knew how smart and capable I am. If only people could see my case stories and see the results I get with my clients, then those referrals would start rolling in. But it's not, right? What truly matters is the latter. What truly matters is asking good questions and follow-up questions. What truly matters is having a genuine curiosity in other people. What truly matters is spending your time connecting and getting to know folks and not just marketing at them. So what does that mean to get to know someone, right? And I'm not being facetious here. I've known people for a very long time, but never got the chance to know them as a person. I know of one individual in particular that I met early on when doing networking. I can't tell you a lick about him. Does he have kids? No clue. Is he married? Maybe. I don't actually know for sure. And what I can tell you is his opinions about the private equity and capital markets for the past 7 years. So what does it mean to get to know someone? So this was the question that developmental psychologist Dan McAdams sought out to answer, and he created a framework based on how we develop as human beings: actor, agent, author. So when we're born into this world, we're actors. We have personality. When psychologists talk about personality, they're almost always referring to the Big Five personality assessment, also known as OSHA. So that's the acronym to remember. So it's openness to new experiences versus closed to new experiences, conscientious versus disinhibited, extroversion versus introversion, agreeable versus disagreeable, or neurotic versus emotional stability. So there's not any particular questions you would ask somebody to get a sense of their personality, but the more time you spend with them, you kind of get a sense of who they are. As we get a little bit older, between ages 5 to 7, we become agents, motivated actors or agents that want things in this world. Right? You might be able to ask somebody, working on anything exciting recently, or do you have big goals for this year? Or even do you have kids? That tends to be a big motivating factor in people's lives. As we become teenagers, we become authors, right? Narrative identity becomes a big part of our lives. Who are we? What is the meaning we ascribe to our lives? You can ask people how they became into the profession they are today. You might ask them how they came to Austin. Most of us did not grow up here, right? Were you running away from something? Were you chasing something or someone as a result? as a result. And I have to give a quick shout out to Austin 3, Sarah Burns. Like every time I'm in that room, all she's doing is creating activities and exercises based on these kinds of questions. Every time you go in there, you learn who people are very, very quickly. But I have to give you a warning, right? The way we ultimately connect with others is by peeling back those masks we all wear in public life and giving some shared vulnerability, giving people the opportunity to see us for who we are and potentially judge us for those characteristics. You know, as an introvert, every time in that room, I'm like, do I really have to tell that personal story to 30 some people I don't really know? No, please don't pick me. Please don't pick me. Is it time to go? No, I think it might be time. How would I volunteer for the next meeting when I'm not here anymore? How about that? Never works, right? But understand, like, if you not only talk about business, the likelihood you are to engage in business actually decreases substantially. It's actually connected with others. That is the foundation of business relationships. Okay, now that we've talked about, the science behind things, the individual interactions, now let's talk about the tactical and practical parts of building a network. And it comes down to three things, right? Prioritization. You can do anything you want, you just can't do everything you want. Two, it becomes about investing in our relationships, right? Find the people you want to work with, then find ways to work with them. And then finally, it's about leveraging that network because it's only as powerful as when it is used. Before we get into that, I want to tell you the thing I hate most about networking. The piece of advice I despise. It takes time. Not that it isn't true, I just hate hearing it, you see. Because it feels just very patronizing, right? Okay, how much time does it take, right? But to be more specific, how much time does it take to go from a handshake to developing a friendship where you might actually expect some commerce to be involved? Now, this was the question that Dr. Jeremy Hall sought out to answer, and through his research, he basically determines it takes as minimum of 10 hours of FaceTime together to get to that point. But the average is actually much higher. It's like 35 to 45 hours. And why the big discrepancy? Well, it depends on how you spend that time. Is it incidental versus intentional? Is it active versus passive? Are you talking about the weather and sports? Are you getting to know people like we just discussed above? Right? And I talked to a very successful BDO officer out of Dallas, and he told me he expects it to take 7 years from handshake to deal. Well, do the math. I see him once every 9 months. We go to lunch, 1 hour, 9 months, 7 years. But I think you can do it a lot faster than that is the point, right? If you go to all your home group meetings, if you go to the affinity groups where you see the most connected, most active members, if you go to the socials, do your one-on-one outreach, you can get there in about 4 to 6 months with any one individual, just by time and attention alone. But me personally, I have over 900 entries in my CRM. The math doesn't pencil out, right? You have to make decisions on who to prioritize. I think it comes down to this, Pareto's principle. According to Pareto, any individual system, the inputs are never equal to the outputs on a one-to-one basis. It skews, and it skews heavily, right? So 10% of the inputs would be responsible for 90% of the outputs, 30% of the inputs to 70%. The most common distribution is 20% of the inputs are responsible for 80% of the outputs. And I think that holds up in networking as well, that 20% of the people you meet will be ultimately responsible for 80% of all economic opportunities you have in your career. So if there's that 20% and it takes that much time to develop a friendship where you might expect commerce, wouldn't it be great to know from the very get-go, before you spend all that time, who's going to be in that 20%? So I think the natural inclination is, well, let me focus on my best referral sources. They're going to see the most opportunity. That's a great place to start. It makes sense. But if somebody doesn't like you, somebody doesn't care about you, they're not going to send you anything, despite how many opportunities come across their desk. But the opposite is also true, right? If somebody likes you, and cares about you, then it doesn't matter what they do as a profession. They're going to find opportunities to get you involved. I'll give you a great example. My dear friend, Jana Menifee, and Menifee LLC, who does certified business valuations. So Jana is downstream from what I do. I don't expect Jana to ever send me a referral in my career, but because we're friends, because she cares, she's put me on 3 different panels last year and a 4th one scheduled for this year 2 of those panels were in front of 80 plus business owners and allowed me to market my services directly to those clients. I'll give you another example. My friend Scott Carley here. Yet again, based on what he does, I don't ever expect a referral from him. But because he cares, he had me on his podcast. Somebody who listened to that podcast reached out. And when I met with that person, they had a lead for me. So Scott Carley's in fact a place to generate those kind of interactions, even though based on what he does, I wouldn't expect that direct referral. So it comes down to this, right? What really should be prioritized is the people you like. Back to Dunbar's research, he basically determined what are the key factors that create relationships. And it wasn't economic opportunity. What it was shared grounds and common values. And he created these 7 pillars that the more you have in common with someone, the more likely you are to develop a friendship with someone. So the first one is language, right? We all speak English in this room. But a lot of this is very context dependent, right? If you're in Europe and traveling, the first time you hear another American or somebody speaking English, you immediately feel that kinship where you're like, oh, I might trust this person's advice to tell me, what restaurants to go to, what to see, where to travel. Whereas on the US side, you may not feel that exact way. Education, right? Similar education. Doctors like speaking with doctors. Lawyers like talking to lawyers. Humor, right? Do you laugh at the same things? You have shared interests, common hobbies, like gardening, hiking, top reading, cooking. And those are just a few of my favorite things. Music, do you listen to the same things? Moral, do you practice the same religion? Do you have the same political beliefs? And then source, where did you grow up in the same place, the same country, same state, the same county, the same city? Did you go to the same high schools or competing ones across the street? But this is a great list if you're introverted like me and you get 40 minutes in that conversation and you hit that lull and you're like, well, I don't know what to ask. I don't want this meeting to end 20 minutes early. You start fishing for common ground, right? What music do you listen to? Where do you grow up? Do you have any hobbies? According to Dunbar, all you need is 2 things in common for a friendship to develop. We all speak English. I heard you all laughing at my dumb jokes. We're well on our way. One of the ways I like to think about this is what I've heard of the Saturday afternoon rule. When you leave that first meeting, you think to yourself, given the opportunity, would I hang out with this person on the Saturday afternoon? If so, then they're probably good friendship material. So if you find people you've liked and might want to develop friendships with or invest in those relationships, the first attribute is to go first or be willing to go first, right? If you have a go second mentality, always waiting for somebody else to make the very first move, you might be waiting around for a very, very, very long time. But if you found people you want to invest in, then start doing so. Here's a list of 9 ways you can invest in those relationships. So first, get somebody paid, right? Potentially hire them for them work. If they're on the job market and they're searching for their next opportunity, potentially help them with various resources. All the scientific and empirical data kind of says the same thing, that the fastest way to get a referral is to give one. And the more referrals you end up giving, the more referrals you will end up receiving. Basically, people like to get to the givers. So if you have one goal for 2026, feel free to steal mine, which is I'm planning on giving 50 referrals this year. That is on average 1 referral per week. The skill that I'm trying to develop in that process is knowing what questions to ask, knowing what words to listen for in conversation, because people don't often ask for help, right? They don't necessarily need it. So who has a listener have to know what to listen for and how to probe, you need to meet this person, they can help you with that situation, whatever you're working on. I was talking to a supervisor, Svetlana. She was the group leader for the unofficial AI group. She did this last year. She gave over more than 50 referrals. She told me one of the strategies that she deploys, she'll call up her old clients. She has one rule for these calls, no solicitation. It's always, how are you doing? What's going on? How's life? What have you been up to? What are you working on? What are your goals? Issues are running? She tells me she's developed to the point that every time she makes one of these phone calls, she's able to generate 2 or 3 referrals for her network every single time. So she knows from experience that when she takes care of her network will take care of her, and has made plenty of business doing so. I had this experience a couple of weeks ago that I was trying to recruit somebody for our group. the firm he worked for was a nationwide firm, so they had other provisors across the country in this firm, but not here locally. So I had reached out to see if he might be a good fit. We're having this conversation, and I like the guy, but then as we're discussing things based on his clientele, he's probably a better fit for like a BNI than our group. But he's telling me his life story. He told me he started his career out as an entrepreneur, running and growing and selling various companies, particularly franchises. He's telling me that he wants to end his career being a business owner yet again. Well, okay, do you want to learn another franchise? He goes, nah, I think I want to buy a different kind of business. Have you spoken with a broker? He goes, no, not yet. It's like, well, what size? What industry? Tells me, he's like, oh, I know 3 brokers that I trust that might be able to take care of you. Like, 1 conversation, 3 referrals, 47 more to go. Now, I'm going to try something a little risky. All right, I'm going to try for this, see if we can gen up some additional referrals, later referrals that might be in this very room today. The quick show of hands, who here sits on the board of a nonprofit? 2, 3. Okay, now keep your hands raised. If your nonprofit has a strategic plan in place and you're happy with it and you're actively managing towards it. So I would love to introduce you to this empty chair that should be Matt Glazer, who was supposed to be here this morning. Matt Glazer works with nonprofits. He helps nonprofits create, maintain, and implement strategic plans. So you may want to reach out to him after this meeting to see if he might be a good fit for what you got going.
We work with nonprofits too, only when anything. If there's any kind of issues, needing optimization on the financial side.
All right, I'm going to try to do one more. Okay, now raise your hand if you've talked to somebody in the past year who's had one of those life transition events that it can be described by the 5 Ds. That is, they have diapers, diplomas, diamonds, divorce, or death. Most of this room. So those are triggering events for probably a third of people in this room. But all 5 of those trigger events are for people who work in wealth management. So if you have those people in your life going through those experiences, you might want to reach out to Julie Stripoli or Eric Boyce or Chris Creed to have that conversation, how they might be able to help the people making those transitions in your life. Now, out of quick curiosity, based on that exercise, is anyone actually going to reach out to some of those people after this meeting? One? Okay. That's good. That's good feedback. All right, but to move on. Okay. So look, there might be years that go by before you have an opportunity to refer somebody work, even if you like them a lot and want to work with them. That's just the reality of the situation. But there are plenty of things to do in the meantime, right? You can potentially introduce them to somebody else who can get them paid. You know, personally, I don't think of myself as anyone's best referral source, but I probably know at least 1 to 3 individuals that I can introduce somebody to, or 100 times more likely than myself to send them work, and can focus on that in the meantime. You do other things. You can invite them to events, other networking events, conferences, friends of the firm events that might be helpful for their careers. You help solve somebody's problem. Does their kid need an internship or no more listens on Spotify? To somebody need a doctor recommendation or to solve one of their health problems. Also, you can share information that will help them achieve their goals, right? Other conferences to go to, maybe tools or market intelligence. I want to talk about a tool real quick that's available to all providers member, and that's the online directory, right? What I've been doing is I'll hop on there because you don't have to wait for the next event to meet people, right? You can get there, you can search the industries you work in, the best referral sources that you want to talk to, do the search. I use that Gemini plugin and scrape, get that into Excel. You never can trust AI, so you have to verify the information and then filter until you get that short list of people you want to talk to. Every Monday morning, I'm sending out 10 emails on all the providers members I want to chat with. And that usually leads to about 3 to 5 meetings in a week. All of them have been fantastic. Chrome.
Yeah, it'll just create the search.
The command is scrape this page, include all the columns you want. About 6 or 7 searches into it, it gets, stops working, so then you have to it starts hallucinating basically, and so the information doesn't work. But do it for 5, new prompt, yeah, it works.
Takes me 2 searches.
These last two, all right, express gratitude, right? We have this great tradition of thankdemonials, testimonials, and provisors. You can also consider taking them out to lunch or drinks as a thank you. And then the last one on the list is be responsive, right? Even if that response is simply, hey, too busy right now, let's talk in 6 weeks. And then hitting that snooze button to follow up in 6 weeks' time. And I swear, this is not just a personal pet peeve. The scientific data says the 2 most common ways friendships come to an end: lack of communication, lack of appreciation. So if you're in the habit of letting emails fall through the cracks,
Yeah.
you may want to, it's probably doing a little more damage to your relationships than you may realize. So another thing I want to talk about for provisors is the Slack channel. What's going on in Slack and why is it so important? So quick show of hands, who here has downloaded Slack and is on it? Most of the room, that's great. Now keep your hand raised if it's on your phone as well. Oh, now keep your hand raised if you have the notifications turned on. Huh, that's actually better than I thought. That's pretty good.
But how many do you look at?
All day, every day.
So what's happening on Slack? Why is it so important? On Slack, it's a 24/7, 365 need, steals, wants. What is a need, steals, want? Somebody has a problem. How do you solve people's problems? 9 out of 10 times, somebody is about to get paid. For 5 minutes of effort on a minute-by-minute basis, I cannot think of a better way to spend time than solving people's problems and getting another friend paid at the same time. Personally, I think the cost of our membership is worth it for the Slack channel alone.
Yeah, you mentioned that several times.
Reason being is I got my first case from provisors in Slack about 4 or 5 months in. The expert litigator, David Lawrence at Rigby Slack and Downtown Group posted on there saying, hey, I need a management consultant who does litigation support. It's like, hey, that's me. Keep in mind, this was on a Saturday afternoon, and I'm 3 beers deep, but I still reply. We set a meeting for Monday, which was retained by Wednesday. That one case paid for my membership 10 times over last year. 2 other people replied days later, like you snooze, you lose. It was too late. We were already retained at that point. So this list comes with one major caveat, though, that I want to get across. So this is not a list of 9 things on how to curry favor and get people to do the things you want. It has to come from a place of authenticity. You know, I've had these situations where somebody makes an introduction and I get on that phone and I'm like, wow, this is the worst meeting I've had in 6 months. Like, I don't feel gratitude. I'm like, is this the quality of company you keep? Right? I mean, we all make mistakes, right? No one bats 1,000. But if you come from a place of authenticity and genuine interest, right, you can always ask yourself, you know, would I do this for a social purpose? You know, do I believe this is in the best interest of both people I'm about to introduce? And if not, you know, don't do it. Have you all picked up on the pattern for this presentation? No? Like, get to know folks. Prioritize the people you like. Trust. How do you build trust? Well, it's not just the words you say, it's the actions you take that demonstrate you're not just self-interested, that you can take other people's best interest to heart and do things for their benefit without expecting necessarily there'll be anything there for you. So know, like, trust, it's more than just the ethos of provisors. It is a quote from a book called The Go-Givers. It's about 100 pages. You can read it in an afternoon, and I would highly recommend it. But know, like, trust. So let's talk about referrals. So in my mind, this comes down to 2 main strategies, and you can do both of them, but it depends on how much based on where you are at in the ecosystem. If you're a specialist like me, right, there's over 10,000 members and provisors. I checked the website. Only 5 people do what I do in programs. That's it. I'm a specialist. So when I go into a room, I have no competition. So I benefit a tremendous amount by guesting a ton, right? Racking up with potential referrals, right? There are some people who are so specialized that they actually get greater benefit from the affinity groups than they do actually from their home groups. So I'd recommend going on the provider's website. There's a list of all the affinity groups you can attend. Find some appealing ones and check them out. There's also an unofficial list of the unofficial affinity groups that's on the Slack channel. Feel free to check that out as well. But the benefit of being a specialist is because I guess so much, I meet other specialists along the way, which gives me the ability to connect, be a bridge and connect between otherwise siloed information and resources. Right? If you don't guess a ton, you might not know we have a personal injury attorney, Chris Park, in the Cedar Park groups, or Brian Levy in the Westlake groups, who is an excellent employment attorney. Right? And I'm giving those two some slack because they don't guess either. So the only way you would potentially meet those folks is actually by going to their groups as well. So when people have off the walls issues, you can be the person to connect all these resources and help solve people's problems. That can be between provisors, it can be between provisors and outside provisors, from Austin to other parts of the country as well. What if you're a generalist? What if every room you walk into, there is somebody who does something exactly like you? Maybe there's multiple people in that room. Well, you have something that us specialists don't have. You have a portfolio. I don't mean own companies. I'm just talking about a recurring client base that you talk to at least once a year. That is a perennial pool of resources and opportunity that you can draw on. The things that you'll might most benefit from is by going deep into your vertical, by becoming a trusted advisor. I know people use this term colloquial to mean that I'm good at my job. Right? That's not actually what it means. That's not a competitive advantage. All your competitors are good at their jobs, all the real ones at least. That doesn't set you apart. But what a trusted advisor is something different. They're a problem solver. They're talking to their client base. They're not trying to assess just their own problems, the ones that they're paid to solve. They're trying to understand all of their problems that they could possibly have. And then they make those connections of what are your issues? What's keeping you up at night? What are your needs, skills, wants? And then connecting that to their deep pool of resources, the other advisors in this room, to solve their clients' needs and issues. What happens when somebody becomes a trusted advisor? Where their client satisfactions go through the roof. They start recommending you to other business owners because they're so happy with the results. Also, just because you created all these referral opportunities for other people in this room, you're now at the top of their list as well whenever that need arises. You know, a trusted advisor never says, that's not what I do. I'm just a vendor. It's what you need. How can I help? If I don't know the person, knows the person, let me get you some names. I'll give a quick shout out to Ian Shanks. I know Ian's a trusted advisor from personal experience. Ian works for Watkins Insurance as a commercial insurance broker and somebody I would never expect a referral from. But because I know he's a trusted advisor and has these discussions with his clients, he had one that couldn't seem to pay their bills on time, which is a sign that they're in distress. But you need a professional like me to come talk to them and straighten things out. So he had that honest conversation, got to express genuine concern. Hey, are y'all okay? Have you any issues? Hey, I know a guy who works with companies that are struggling, may be able to help you through it. Ultimately, that situation didn't pan out, but I know Ian treats all of his clients that way and is constantly bringing trusted advisors into his client base. You know, I'll give another shout out to Sarah Goodman, the group leader of Austin 5. She probably does this better than anyone else. I'd say every single month she's posting one need to a want into that Slack channel, making sure her clients are taken care of and bringing people in. So obviously these two strategies work really well together, right? Some people bring up the issues, other people connect the resources. So I've become a firm believer that there's not a single customer or client issue that this provider community isn't able to solve together. So I'll leave you with one final thought, that a great network isn't what you have, it's ultimately what you make happen, right? There's really no discernible difference between knowing a bunch of folks where there's no mutual support, where there's no proactive engagement, and literally not knowing anyone at all. But if you're willing to go first, if you're willing to invest in your friendships and relationships, one day you very well find that you're surrounded by 100 friends.